Good morning, everybody. I hope you're well. It's Monday the 29th. Let's immediately address the swing trades that I had because they were initiated earlier this week. See how they were initiated on the 25th of September, early in the morning. And I've actually added to the DAX one because it was in profit. You can see here, first I initiated and then I added a couple of hours later. All good. And Friday it was looking good and then it wasn't looking so good. And I wasn't there to perhaps manage it as actively as I wanted to. So now I need to make a decision. And that's probably where I'm going to just, keep my calm for a little bit. I want to have a look at the daily chart and say, okay, if we start trading above, I'll probably use the weekly chart if I'm being completely nocturnal about this. But I'll make a decision on this momentarily, but I am inclined to give it some space because when you operate with the 72-week cycle, you have to give it plus minus one. And I'm happy to show you what that means right now. Although we do have a first bar negative coming up in about 10 seconds. Just want to see where we close. This is where it's getting a little dangerous because we are gap up on indices everywhere. Obviously because of the positive performance out of the US markets on Friday, and also overnight you had a largely positive Asian session. So we got a first bar negative in the FTSE. What that means is that the first 5-minute bar is a negative bar. If you followed that strategy last week, you would have been happy if you saw it on Friday. So here's Friday, first bar negative, and bang, you nailed the low of the day. Thursday, very good, went 10 points against you, and then rally. What's interesting about the DAX is that the overnight range top was breached just before market, and now we're headed lower. If you're asking me how it went in Frankfurt, I'm going to say not very well. Not very well at all. So the DAX is currently trading at 23,780. So we are just slightly above where we were Friday, where we closed. Let me show you the DAX. Notice how it came up to the highs of. Actually, it went as high as, so by my reckoning, what it did was it just went above the highs from the 15th of September. So that's what it looks like. And then we're currently here. Okay. Well, that's reassuring to know because then it suggests that we are witnessing overhead resistance around 23,900. That's probably where I would place my stop loss. FTSE had a first bar negative but never gave a buy signal. That unfortunately also happens. And the DAX is coming down to the overnight range low. So now I'm going to have to wait. So now we're looking at a 5-minute chart and I'll be looking for is 3 able to trade above 2? And considering that 1 and 2 are bear bars, then I would normally like to sell short. The caveat here, and there's always a caveat in technical analysis, always is, yeah, but you just hit the overnight range low. So maybe you need to give it a little bit more time before you initiate a short. If you're sat there thinking, oh, why didn't we buy the FTSE? Well, you're entitled to, of course you are. However, a setup is a setup, and I don't just invent new rules halfway into the game. It's just not what you do. We'll focus on the DAX. Okay, I'm in doubt, and that's fine. I don't want to proclaim to know it all. We have a first bar negative and a second bar positive. If we close near the high of the second bar, that would indicate buying strength, and I would want to be a buyer. Problem is that we are inside the overnight range. Another problem that I have is that we travel from the top of the range down to the low end of the range, and that's where we stopped. So now, technically, bar number 3 unfolding now should say, oh, we want to be long above. However, because this takes place inside the overnight range, I have to quickly make up my mind saying, right, do I want to sell the ante, meaning I'm selling short here because we are inside the overnight range, or do I simply just go with momentum and buying long? That is the issue I have right now. So yeah, it's going to be a challenging decision to make, but hey, it's not like we haven't been here before. And the fact that bar number 2 itself is an inside bar of bar number 1, well, that just tells you, well, the market is in doubt as well. Of course, you don't make money from talking a good game, you actually need to trade it. So we're coming down to a trigger, and I'm going to take a chance, and I'm going to be a buyer here. Are we just going to test this area and then I'm going to go back into the trading range? Or are we actually going to have a blowout lower? None of which I can answer. All I can do is I can say, okay, I can try and trade it with some coherence. And that's what I've done by being a buyer below the overnight range. So right now we are 12 points in profit. So we could say, okay, let's move the stop loss up to 17 points away. If this does work, where would I add to the position? Okay, so we are 20 points in profit. So I suggest that the stop loss with some reasonable logic could be moved to break even now. Voila. I'm not overly aggressive this morning. Allow me to explain to you why I'm not aggressive. I think being aggressive is very much a function of how you feel physically, mentally. And I don't feel so great this morning. I'm down with the plain vanilla trades, but I'm not overly feeling like being aggressive. I love to add to my winning trade, but I have to feel strong in that moment going, yeah. In fact, I'm pretty certain we're going to get stopped out. And we did. So what does that tell us? Normally, when you see a pattern like this, what we just saw here, where you see a bounce, this means that this market actually should go lower. Oh, should I? I think I should. I'm shorting the DAX on a traditional school run short. Now, after I just said, don't feel so aggressive, but all of a sudden, my juices got flowing a little bit. Going, wow, are we actually breaking lower here? Or are we going to fill the gap? Now it's a question of, can it break lower? And I've entered a short position. Much depends on how 10, this is bar 10, how 10 closes. Guy called Kakla saying, how do you manage the different sides? Short on a swing, on a long, on a, I'm not actually, I just use different instruments and I don't have an issue with that at all. I operate 2 different time frames here. And so, sorry, I was long intraday, but short overnight. Yeah, I'm relatively okay with that. Now we're trading back into the range. Already my gut feel says, if this was a breakdown, we would have broken down now. We wouldn't have traded back into the trading range. I think I'm going to move my stop loss to 95, 96. That's what I'm prepared to risk on this. So, okay, this is brilliant in the DAX. I'm going to move my stop loss just to above 81. So we basically closed the gap here. We went 41. Do you see that? I'm adding to my DAX here at 50. There's always something to be concerned about. My concern here is that we just hit the closing price. So I think I'm going to close my position, closed and closed. So I've taken profit with a gap fill in the DAX. That's me done, ladies and gentlemen. Love you lots. Good morning, America. I hope you're well. So let's do an update. I have got some swing positions open. It looked a lot worse earlier this morning. I was down about 1,000 pounds. So why am I holding on to them? Well, let me show you Dow Jones Index here. If you're not familiar with this cycle that I call the 72-week cycle, then let me give you a crash course. I discovered, and I use the words here very carefully, discovered, because nobody invents anything in the markets. You discover things. And I discovered that there seems to be a fairly consistent cycle called the 72-week cycle. Now been 72 weeks since this high to this current week here, and I'm arguing that a high could be forming. What would nil and void it? Well, a nil and void would perhaps be new highs for the week, or definitely a close above last week's high. So that's why I'm sort of holding on to this short position, although that short position is quite small. You'll see that I'm using very, very little in my margin to run the position. So let's look at the Dow Jones Index. The Dow peaked above the overnight range, retested it up here, and is now coming down towards the low end of the range. And we are in a gap up situation. This is where the Dow closed on Friday. The Nasdaq just peaked above the overnight range, traded back into the overnight range, and let's see where the closing price from Friday is, and the Nasdaq is much, much lower. So a significant gap up on the Nasdaq as well. So now it becomes a question of waiting for the right kind of setup. I was trading the DAX this morning. So I get this question here quite frequently. So, hi Tom, I'm curious as to why your swing trades were placed on the December futures contract and not on the rolling futures contract. Any particular reason? Yes, definitely. The reason is that when you execute a trade in indices, say US Tech, which I will trade normally, and you'll see the spread is razor tight at 0.9. But now look at the December future and you'll see that the spread is free. Why a difference? Well, because TD365 builds in the spread, but also the overnight charge. So if I was trading this contract here, or indeed the rolling future, I would have to pay what we call the overnight holding charge every night. But by doing it like this for the December contract, it means I built it in immediately, and I only need to hold it for more than 2 trading days before it makes more sense to trade the futures December as opposed to the future rolling future or the daily. That's why. Now I think I'm going to be filled on my FTSE. I'm certainly close. Okay, I am now long FTSE. So the first 15-minute bar in the Dow was very bearish, whilst the Nasdaq very bullish. Just want to show you a setup that maybe materialize in the DAX index. Would mean to be a buyer around 81 low. My FTSE position is not doing well. My DAX position has been filled. That stop loss is a little bit too far away from my liking, so I'm going to move that up. I'm taking profit in the DAX here. So 1 minute left. We're trading below the overnight range, filled the gap. Nasdaq is doing the opposite, trading above the overnight range. So here we go. So technically we should be buyers in the Nasdaq. 731 is the level in the Nasdaq. Stand by in the Nasdaq. Bought the Nasdaq at 710. So I was just basically waiting for a better entry in the Nasdaq. And I placed my stop loss in the Nasdaq where the short trigger would come on the school run. My entry in the Nasdaq was based around trying to buy below prior bar low. The Nasdaq is not going well. Someone is asking me why I'm doing in the FTSE. Let me just explain the reasoning. So this is the question. Hey Tom, why are you buying the FTSE that's already in a free fall on a 5-minute chart? And I said, is a setup a setup? The good trade is the hard trade. And he said, you mentioned in your book, Best Loser Wins, that the price is not like toilet paper. And if it's falling like a rock, then better trade what you see, not what you think. It's contrary. And I argue, no, because I'm trading a setup called first bar negative, and how I feel is not as important as the statistical evidence of the setup. How it got there, fast or slow, should not matter that much. That's not entirely true, because if it's a monster move. But I guess my point here is I bought the FTSE because of something very specific it did. What it did beforehand, well, it's fulfilling all the criteria of a good trade. So I'm just going to have to sort of stick with that and then say, I don't know, hope for the best. I'm wondering if I should take profit up here. It seems to be developing a trading range. But I don't know if you see this, but the DAX is actually trying to push out of this. And the Dow could be setting up a long as well. I'm closing my Nasdaq here. No, let me just, I'm going to close. Do I? Fuck it. I will close it. Close Nasdaq. I think I'll halve my position in the FTSE just in case this goes south. Below the overnight range with 2 negative candles should actually be a sell setup, but I'm gonna do the opposite and buying the Dow here. It triggered a long signal here, triggered a long, and I bought it at 27. Got it a bit cheaper. So FTSE is definitely not playing ball, initiating a long signal on school run, deciding not to take the ante. Why? Because the DAX is rallying, and the DAX tends not to rally if the Dow is about to fall. Now I would love to see buyers in the Dow step in below 9. Stand by in the Nasdaq for a long and placed an order at 06. Okay, filled on or not. So Nasdaq went down and tested the low end of the previous bar. I suppose I could have used that as an order entry area. No, I might actually just get out of this. It was a deeper retracement than I thought. So close the Nasdaq. Okay, that's looking better because that was down 40 odd points. That would be the kind of trade I could be tempted to add to. Of course, I'll send a full screenshot of all my trades. So here's a great question. It's basically saying, when are you using anti and when are you using normal SRS? That, is a really good question because I sometimes have to go, right, I am actually looking at the German DAX, and that made me realize I don't want to be short Dow because it's so rare that the Dow falls whilst the DAX is doing this. That's why I decided I wanted to be long the Dow. And while I had some confidence in the FTSE, although it's not actually performing, is it? And me getting out of my Nasdaq, that was a big mistake. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm going to clear the deck in the Dow, closing the Dow here and closing FTSE. I decided to close my Dow because I felt that this was just hovering around the neutral line, but no real impetus. That's it for me. Stay strong. Lots of love. Bye-bye.